All right, so let's pick up where we left off. So right here, we're going to combine like terms. So these two, when you combine it, you get 1.2. Well, you could just subtract 96 actually, right? Subtract 96 from both sides, yeah. Oh, okay. No, when you combine these two, you get negative 0.40x. Sorry, that threw me off. Plus 96 is equal to 84. Subtract 96 from both sides, you get negative 0.40x is equal to negative 12. Divide both sides by negative 0.40. Divide by negative 0.40. These cancel out, and you're left with x is equal to 30. So how many kilograms of each alloy, sorry. So we know that x is 30, so this part right here is 30. To figure out what this is, we're going to do 120 minus 30, which is equal to 90. So the second alloy is going to have 90. So 120 minus 30 is equal to 90. So we have the two alloys, one is 30, the other one is 90. All right, the next one. Oh, okay. So here we have factoring, aka solve, right? So we have to solve for each of these. So we know that for these two right here, the 3 is going to get factored out. So 3 is our greatest common factor. So we're going to factor the 3 out. We used to do this a lot. So x squared minus 9 is what's remaining, is equal to 0. So we know that, yeah, if you do distributive property, you can prove that that's true, but I saw that 3 was the greatest common factor. 27 divided by 3 is 9. So we want to factor as much as possible, so the 3 comes down, but the x squared can be factored into x plus 3 and x minus 3 is equal to 0. So we have 3 different cases. I'm just going to do this for the first one. So we have 3 equals 0, which doesn't make sense. So we can get rid of that. We have x plus 3 is equal to 0. So x is equal to negative 3, and x minus 3 equals 0. So x is equal to positive 3. So your two answers here are going to be x equals negative 3 and positive 3. Here is going to be very similar, right? I'm going to pull out a 4. I'm going to do this really quick. X squared minus 16 is equal to 0. So the 3 different cases that we have are 4, x plus 4, x minus 4. All of them equal 0. So you get 4 equals 0, which doesn't make sense, as x is equal to negative 4 and positive 4. Those are our two cases. All right, let's move on. Here I see that 5 is our greatest common factor, so you always want to pull out the greatest common factor, see what's left. X squared minus 5 is equal to 0. So I have two different cases. I have 5 equals 0, which doesn't make sense. So I have y squared minus 5 is equals to 0, which can make sense. Add 5 to both sides, you get y squared is equal to 5. To get the y by itself, I want to square root both sides. So I get y is equal to the square root of 5, positive, negative. I'm not sure if he taught you that part, but that's the full complete answer. This is exactly the same, right? 6x squared minus 2 is equal to 0. 6 equals 0 doesn't make sense, but x squared minus 2 equals 0 does make sense. Add 2 to both sides. X squared is equal to 2. Square root both sides, you get x is equal to radical 2, plus or minus. Okay, this, so first thing I would see here is that the greatest common factor is x, right? There's no 2 and 3, there's no greatest common factor. So I'm left with 2x plus 3 equals 0. And again, I can do distribute to check that I'm right. So I have two different cases here. I have x equals 0 and 2x plus 3 is equal to 0. So this is already done. That's one solution. Subtract 3 from both sides. You get 2x is equal to negative 3. Divide both sides by 2. So you get x is equal to negative 3 halves. Second solution. Here, I was trying this earlier. I was trying to do AC method. It didn't work because there's no two numbers that multiply to be 6 and add to be 3. So you just have to do quadratic formula. Quadratic formula says you do the opposite of b. So whatever b is, which is the number in front of the x, you do the opposite. So it's positive 3. I'm going to put a negative 3. Plus or minus the square root of b squared. So 3 squared is equal to 9. Minus 4. It's always times 4. Times a times c. So 2 times 3. All over 2 times a. So 2 times 2. So now you just evaluate this, right? So 9 minus 4 times 2 times 3. When you go ahead and figure that out, 4 times 2 times 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times 3 is 24. So I really get -3 plus or minus the square root of 9 minus 24 all over 4, right? Make sure that the fraction bar is over the whole thing. 9 minus 24 is -15. So I get -3 plus or minus the square root of -15 over 4. I don't think he showed you the complex number thing. Like, I don't think he showed you the I thing, but just in case, that's the same thing as -3 plus or minus I radical 15 all over 4. I highly doubt that he actually showed that to you, but I'd be shocked if he did. All right. Here, same thing, right? We're just going to do quadratic formula again. You said to maybe go through 2 problems with quadratic formula. So I'm going to do this one and then let it rock. All right, so first thing I want to do, because I didn't do it up here, I'm going to go ahead and write down the formula, right? So the formula is -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So the way I remember it is there was a negative boy, and he had a choice to go to a radical party. The boy was a square. He missed out on 4 awesome chicks, and the party was all over at 2 a.m. So I don't know if you have to memorize the formula or not, but that's the formula. I'm going to do it, like I said, one more time, just to make sure that you're good with it. So here we go. Okay, so here we have -4. So the b is, we're going to do the opposite of b, right? So right now the b is -4, so I'm going to make it +4. Plus or minus the square root of b squared. So I'm going to do -4 squared minus 4 times a times c, so 4 times 5 times 3. Hi, Zoe. All over 2 times a, so 2 times 5. So now it becomes basically like a calculator question, right? So this is going to be 16, so the square root is going to stay, still going to be 4 plus or minus all over 10. So that's going to be 16 minus 4 times 5 is 20. 20 times 3 is 60. Right? And so now we just have to go ahead and figure out what that is. So 16 minus 60 is some number. So it's going to be 4 plus or minus the square root of negative whatever that number is divided by 10. I want to say that number is 34, but don't quote me. Yeah. So final answer, and again, you should be able to leave it like that. This problem is exactly the same thing. Just go ahead and do quadratic formula. So I'm going to skip that. This is also quadratic formula, except now instead of a x equals, we have a y equals, but the format is still exactly the same. 42 goes back to what we did earlier. I'll just go through this really quick. Factor out of x, we're left with x minus 5 is equal to 0. We have 2 different cases, x equals 0 and x minus 5 equals 0. So here x is equal to 5, folks. So 2 answers. Okay. Moving on over here, same thing, quadratic formula, quadratic formula. Here is not quadratic formula, even though you could use it, but there's an easier way. So I add 4 to both sides, so you get 3y squared is equal to 4. Divide both sides by 3. So boom, this cancels out. So you're left with y squared is equal to 4 over 3. We want to square root. I'll just do this in a different color so you can see it, right? Square root everything. So we get y is equal to, the square root of 4 is 2, over, on the bottom we have radical 3. But we can't have a radical on the bottom, so we have to rationalize that by multiplying it by itself. God bless you, Joe. So on the top we have 2 radical 3 over, radical 3 times radical 3 is 3. So that's going to be our final answer. Alrighty. Quadratic formula there. Right here, same concept. So the u gets factored out. Oh, Bubba. So we have 4u plus 3 is equal to 0. Zoe wants attention. So we get u is equal to 0, and we get 4u plus 3 is equal to 0. Subtract 3, so we get 4u is equal to -3. Divide both sides by 4, so you get u is equal to -3 over 4. She just wants attention. Ignore her. These over here. So we want to get this radical by itself. What's the matter? We want to get the radical by itself, so we want to subtract x from both sides. So we're left with square root of x plus 5 is equal to 7 minus x. Now we can square. So these two cancel each other out. So you're left x plus 5 is equal to, and then if you do 7 minus x times 7 minus x, boom, 49, boom, negative 7x, boom, negative 7x, and boom, positive x squared. You get x squared minus 14x plus 49. Subtract x, get everything on one side, like last time, minus 5. So you're left with x squared minus 15x plus 44. And then here is where you do quadratic formula, right? Here. I don't think I need to go through that with you. I'll do a couple of other ones just to make sure. Go play with your toys. Go play with your toys. I don't have anything to. Oh, here. Take your bear. Go. Okay. So subtract x, subtract x. So I'm just going to set this up for you. Negative, and then square root of 13 minus x is equal to 1 minus x. We want to get that radical by itself, so we could just divide by negative 1. Divide by negative 1, which is the same thing as just switching the signs for everything. So the negative sign goes away, which is what we want. We want to get the square root of 13 minus x is equal to 1 divided by negative 1 is negative 1. Negative divided by negative is a positive. So this is the same thing as x minus 1. And do the same thing that I did up here, right? So we're going to square both sides, square both sides. So you're left with 13 minus x is equal to, and I told you that this is the same thing as x minus 1 squared, right? Because I can flip these two commutative property. So I get x squared minus 2x plus 1. Bring everything to one side, right? Minus 13 positive x minus, no, plus x minus 13. So these cancel out, and we're left with x squared minus x minus 12 is equal to 0. This is easily factorable, I think. So we're going to have, it's going to multiply to be a negative, so a negative positive. The bigger sign has to be the negatives. That's going to be the two answers that we have. So x is equal to 4 and negative 3. This is exactly the same thing, and so is this. So I'm going to skip those two. All right, almost done. So over here, we want to get that x by itself. So what we do is divide everything by 4. The only time you got to remember to switch these inequalities is when you divide by a negative or you multiply by a negative. So right now we're not dividing by a negative, we're dividing by a positive, so we're good. So we have negative 2 over 4, which is negative 1/2, reduces, right? Less than x, less than 5 over 4. Final answer. Here we divide by 6. This is exactly the same thing. So that's 1/2 less than or equal to, the 6's cancel out, x less than 2, right? 2 down. Here we want to subtract 2 first from everything. So when we do that, negative 4, negative 2 is negative 6, less than or equal to, right? The 2x comes down, this cancels out, less than or equal to negative 4. Divide everything by 2, and we go back to what we did up there. So this is negative 3 less than or equal to x, less than or equal to negative 2. This is exactly the same thing. Those are exactly the same thing as well, except I think I'm going to do this one. So minus 1, minus 1, minus 1, boom. 3 minus 1 is 2, less than or equal to, right? These cancel out. This is why I wanted to do it, because we're going to eventually divide by negative 2. Less than 6. So now look, we're dividing by negative 2, right? Dividing by negative 2, dividing by negative 2. So when you do that, all the signs switch. So what I mean by that is 2 divided by negative 2 is negative 1. Less than or equal to, these cancel out, so you're left with x less than negative 3, right? So that's less than, this is less than or equal to. So this is your final answer. You can, if you wanted to, check it with the number line. This is the same thing. This is going to be the same thing. Okay, these problems, okay? So over here, what you want to do is